The evening sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the music academy, casting golden lines across the polished floor. The place was alive with excitement. Students in elegant clothes hurried back and forth, carrying sheet music and chatting about their upcoming performances. It was the night before the Academy's annual gala, the event everyone looked forward to all year. Parents, sponsors, and local musicians would fill the grand hall to hear the young talents play. Among those students was a girl everyone knew, graceful, confident, and admired. She came from a wealthy family that had donated to the Academy for years. She always wore expensive perfume, her nails polished, her dresses flawless. Her laughter carried easily down the hall, and so did her pride. She was talented, yes, but she knew it too well. To her, music wasn't just about feeling. It was a way to show off how much better she was than others. That afternoon, as students rehearsed their pieces on the grand piano, the janitor quietly worked in the corner. He was a man most people never really noticed. His hair had turned gray too early, and his uniform looked too big on his thin frame. He moved slowly, pushing the mop across the floor, stopping every now and then to collect empty bottles and tissues left behind. No one ever spoke to him unless they had to. He was just the man who cleaned up after them. The girl noticed him out of the corner of her eye and wrinkled her nose. "I don't understand why they let people like that walk around here during rehearsals," she whispered to her friend. "It ruins the atmosphere," her friend giggled. "He's just doing his job," she said. "Maybe he likes the music." The girl rolled her eyes. What would he know about music? Just then, the janitor paused near the piano to wipe the dust off its edges. His hand brushed over the keys, and for a second his fingers hovered there. It was such a small gesture that no one else noticed. But for a heartbeat, his eyes softened as if the instrument spoke to something deep inside him. Then he looked down again, quietly returning to his work. "Hey!" The girl called out suddenly, her voice sharp with mischief. The janitor turned, startled. "You like touching the piano, huh?" she said, smirking. "How about this? Play something for us." Her friends laughed. One of them added, "Yeah, play something." "Let's see what you've got." The janitor looked down, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, miss," he said softly. "I'm just cleaning. I'm not supposed to." The girl cut him off. "Oh, come on, it's not that serious," she said, crossing her arms. "If you can play even half as well as me, I'll marry you." Everyone burst out laughing. The sound echoed through the hall. The janitor's face turned red, and he quietly stepped back, trying to fade into the background. But the laughter didn't stop. The girl laughed the loudest, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Don't take it personally," her friend whispered, still chuckling. "She's just joking." But there was something in the janitor's expression that made even the laughing students hesitate for a moment. He didn't look angry, just sad, like he'd heard those kinds of words too many times in his life. He gave a small, polite nod and turned away, going back to his bucket and mop. The girl didn't notice. She was too busy laughing, basking in the attention her little scene had created. The rehearsal went on. The piano's bright notes filled the hall again, but something about the room felt heavier now. Even her music, though flawless, sounded hollow, as if the echo of her joke still lingered. After everyone left for the evening, the janitor stayed behind as usual. He walked slowly across the empty stage, picking up papers and folding stray chairs. The silence felt different when the lights were low. He stopped beside the grand piano again, his fingers brushing the keys gently. The sound of one soft note filled the air, pure and tender. For a moment, his tired eyes closed. He whispered to himself, "It's been a long time." No one saw him sit down on the bench. His hands hovered over the keys, unsure, trembling slightly. Then he began to play, just a few notes at first, then more and more. The melody that came out was slow, fragile, full of emotion. It was the kind of music that made you stop and listen even if you didn't want to. The sound wrapped around the empty hall like a memory. For the first time in years, the janitor let the music speak for him. His fingers knew the path without thinking. Every note carried a story, of love once lost, of dreams abandoned, of days spent in silence. When he finished, the last chord faded softly into the night. He sat there for a long moment, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Then he sighed, stood up, and went back to his mop. The next morning, the academy was busy again. Students rushed through the doors, dressed in neat uniforms, laughing and chatting about the upcoming event. The girl was surrounded by her usual group, bragging about her solo piece. She hadn't even thought about the janitor since the day before. When she walked into the hall, she noticed him mopping near the entrance. Out of habit, she smirked. "Good morning," she said in a tone that sounded polite but wasn't. He smiled faintly and nodded without speaking. Something about his calmness irritated her. She was used to being the center of attention, not ignored. One of her friends whispered, "You were so funny yesterday. That joke about marrying him, I can't believe his face." The girl laughed again, but the sound came out a little forced. "Yeah, I was just joking," she said. Obviously. At that moment, the music teacher entered, clapping her hands for silence. "Everyone, please listen. Tonight's performance is very important. Make sure your rehearsals are done properly. We want the audience to feel the heart behind your music." "The heart," the girl repeated under her breath, amused, as if anyone really plays with their heart. The teacher turned to the janitor, who was still cleaning quietly near the wall. "Thank you for helping us keep this place beautiful," she said kindly. "We couldn't do it without you." The girl blinked. She'd never heard anyone speak to him that way before. The janitor nodded humbly and continued working. Something about the simple exchange stayed with her longer than she expected. Later that afternoon, as she practiced her piece, she noticed the janitor sitting in the back corner during his break. He wasn't watching her, just resting. Still, something about his presence made her uneasy. When she struck the final chord of her song, she looked up and said sharply, "You can go now." "I'm done practicing." He gave her a small, polite nod again and left the room quietly. Her friend frowned. "Why are you being like that?" "He didn't do anything," the girl shrugged. "He's just a janitor. He shouldn't be hanging around during rehearsals." But deep inside there was a tiny spark of guilt, one she didn't want to admit. That evening, she stayed behind to polish her performance. The hall was almost empty, except for a few lights near the stage. She played her piece again and again, but something felt off. The notes were perfect, but they didn't feel alive. Frustrated, she slammed the lid of the piano shut and sighed. That's when she heard it, soft, distant notes floating through the hall. She froze. The music was coming from the far end of the building, delicate yet powerful. Each note carried emotion she couldn't describe. It was the kind of playing that made her chest tighten. She followed the sound quietly, her shoes barely touching the floor. The closer she got, the clearer the melody became. It wasn't a student. It wasn't even a song she recognized. It was something raw, real, the kind of music that came from pain and love at once. When she peeked around the corner, her breath caught. It was the janitor. He sat at the old piano in the small practice room, his eyes closed, his fingers moving effortlessly across the keys. The expression on his face wasn't one of pride or showmanship. It was peace, and the kind she had never seen before. Every note he played felt alive, as if it came straight from his soul. She stood there frozen, her heart racing. The same man she had mocked was playing like someone who had lived 100 lives in one. She wanted to step forward, to say something, but she couldn't move. She just listened. When he finally stopped, the silence in the room was deafening. He sighed softly, then reached up to wipe his eyes. She quickly stepped back before he could see her, her hands trembling. That night she couldn't sleep. The image of him at the piano kept replaying in her mind. The way his fingers had moved, the emotion in his playing, and it didn't make sense. How could someone who cleaned floors play like that? Why was he a janitor at all? The next morning she arrived early before anyone else. The piano sat there silent, waiting. She ran her hand over the keys, remembering the melody she'd heard. For the first time, she felt small. Her pride, her laughter, her confidence, it all seemed childish now. She whispered to herself, "Who are you?" But deep down, she already knew this was only the beginning. Something inside her had shifted, something that would change the way she saw music and people forever. A morning sun spilled softly through the tall windows of the music academy. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, a scent the girl had grown used to over the years. But today, she noticed it in a different way. Her mind kept returning to the janitor, to the way his fingers had moved across the piano the night before. She couldn't stop thinking about the music he had played, how it had sounded like it carried a lifetime of stories. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps light but purposeful. Students were bustling around her, laughing, carrying their instruments, rehearsing scales. The girl, usually so confident, felt an unfamiliar weight in her chest. Something about the previous evening had unsettled her. It wasn't just the music itself, but the man who had played it. How could someone so ordinary on the outside produce something so extraordinary? Her friend waved at her, excitedly showing the latest choreography for a small performance. "You have to see this," she said, twirling in place. The girl forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. She excused herself politely and walked toward the small practice room where she had first heard the janitor play. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear faint strains of piano music. She paused, holding her breath. Was it him again? She pushed the door open slowly. To her surprise, the room was empty. The piano sat in the corner silent, the lid closed. She stepped closer and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, imagining the melody she had heard the night before. The notes she remembered danced in her mind. She could almost feel the weight of his emotions in the air. "Who is he?" she whispered to herself. Her curiosity was stronger than her embarrassment or pride. Later that day, she overheard two teachers talking quietly near the staff room. They didn't notice her peeking from the hallway. "Did you see him yesterday?" one whispered. "He hasn't played in years, not since, well, you know." The other teacher nodded. "Yes, it's a shame. Such talent gone because of circumstances. But he's happy here, quietly doing his work." The girl froze. She leaned closer, straining to hear. "Circumstances?" she whispered. "What does that mean?" They didn't notice her, and they walked away. The girl was left standing there, her heart racing. The idea that this quiet janitor had once been more than just a man who cleaned floors began to take hold in her mind. He had a past, a real human story that no one had bothered to notice. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The girl tried to focus on her own practice, but her hands felt clumsy on the piano keys. Every note she played seemed hollow. She replayed in her mind the way the janitor's fingers had moved, so sure, so confident. How could someone who seemed so ordinary carry such extraordinary skill? The thought made her uneasy, even jealous. During lunch, she sat alone in the cafeteria picking at her food. Her friends were laughing loudly at the next table, but their voices felt distant, unimportant. Her thoughts kept returning to the janitor. She wanted to see him, to hear him play again, to understand. And somewhere deep inside, she wanted to know why he didn't perform publicly, why he stayed in the background unnoticed. She found him later that afternoon in the music library, quietly arranging chairs after everyone had left. He noticed her approach but didn't speak. She stood there, uncertain how to start. I heard you play yesterday," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. He looked at her, calm and unreadable. "You did?" he asked softly. There was no pride in his voice, just curiosity. "It was amazing," she admitted, her cheeks warming. "I've never heard anything like it." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I played for anyone." She hesitated, then asked, "Why not? Why not perform? You're incredible." His gaze drifted down to the floor, and for a moment the calm expression faltered. Life changes things," he said quietly. "Sometimes the path you wanted is taken away and you have to keep moving forward, even if your heart stays behind." She didn't press him. Something about the sadness in his voice made her feel guilty. She remembered how she had mocked him, how easily she had laughed without thinking. She wanted to apologize, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said softly, "I'd like to hear you play again sometime, if that's okay." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, I think I would like that too." The girl walked away slowly, a mixture of curiosity and unease swirling inside her. For the first time, she began to wonder what it really meant to be talented, to have skill to carry emotion through music. She realized that all her years of practice, all her awards and recognition, didn't carry the weight she had heard in his playing. The rest of the week passed in a blur of rehearsals and preparation for the gala. The girl continued to practice tirelessly, but her mind kept drifting to the janitor. She found herself imagining his life, his story, and the music that seemed to flow from him as naturally as breathing. She wondered what had happened to him, what had caused him to stop performing, and why he had chosen to work here, cleaning floors instead of standing on a stage. She asked a few fellow students if they knew anything about him. Most just shrugged. "He's been here forever," one said. "Just does his job, that's all." But she wasn't satisfied with that answer. There had to be more. The depth she had heard in his music couldn't come from someone who had lived a simple, unremarkable life. She began paying closer attention to him, watching how he moved, how he handled the piano when he cleaned, how he carried himself with quiet dignity. Every small gesture made her realize there was more to him than anyone suspected. One evening, she decided to stay late after everyone else had left. The hall was empty, the shadows long and soft, the air filled with the faint scent of polished wood and dust. She hid behind a column and watched as he entered the practice room. For a moment, he simply stood there silent, looking at the piano. Then he sat down and slowly, deliberately, his hands found the keys. She didn't hear music at first. Only a soft, hesitant note, almost like a question. Then another and another. The melody began to form, gentle at first, then growing richer, more confident. She felt her chest tighten as she listened. Every note was filled with feeling, sadness, hope, longing, love. It was music that spoke without words, music that told a story more vivid than any conversation. She realized then that she had been wrong. Talent wasn't about recognition or applause. It wasn't about fancy clothes or expensive instruments. It was about the ability to reach people's hearts, to make them feel something they didn't know they could feel. And this man, the janitor everyone ignored, had that ability in abundance. She stayed hidden, listening until the music faded. When he finally rose from the bench, he seemed to sigh, not with sadness, but with a sense of release. He left the room quietly, and she followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about what she had witnessed. She felt a strange mix of awe and shame. She had mocked him. She had laughed at his expense. And yet he had given her a gift and a glimpse of something pure and extraordinary. She realized that her pride, her arrogance, had blinded her. She had believed that talent was only what could be seen on the surface, in awards, in applause. But real talent, real artistry, could be quiet, unnoticed, and still more powerful than anything she had ever known. Over the next few days, she began to change, almost without realizing it. She paid attention to him when she saw him in the hallways. She greeted him politely, waited for him to respond before walking away, and stopped making jokes at his expense. Her friends noticed, but she brushed it off. She didn't want to explain. She was beginning to understand something they hadn't yet: the power of humility, the depth of hidden talent, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. Then, one afternoon, as she practiced in the hall, she heard a soft knock at the door. She looked up and saw him standing there holding a small sheet of music. "May I?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the piano. She nodded. Of course. He sat down, opened the sheet music, and began to play. This time she didn't hide. She watched and she listened, and as the melody filled the room, she felt a new understanding bloom inside her. She realized that music wasn't a competition, wasn't about pride or recognition. It was a way to connect, to heal, to speak the words that people couldn't say. And for the first time, she began to see him, truly see him, and not as a janitor, not as a man to be mocked, but as someone who carried a lifetime of stories, someone whose heart spoke through every note he played. She knew then that her life, her understanding of music, and even her understanding of herself would never be the same again. The next day at the academy was buzzing with energy. Students moved hurriedly across the polished floors, carrying instruments, notes, and music stands. Everyone was talking about the gala performance, whispering about who would impress the judges the most. The girl felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. The memory of the janitor's music haunted her. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had played, how every note had carried more emotion than any performance she had ever heard. She walked down the corridor, trying to focus on her own rehearsal. But even as she practiced her scales and practiced her solo piece, her mind kept drifting back to him. She wondered what it must have been like to play with such depth, to be able to pour your soul into every note. She felt a twinge of envy, but also admiration. She wanted to understand, to see how he could create something so beautiful without seeking applause or recognition. During lunch, she watched him quietly from a distance as he moved about the cafeteria, picking up crumbs and empty cups left behind by the students. He moved with a quiet efficiency, always gentle, never hurried. Something about the calm way he worked made her feel both respect and curiosity. She realized she had never truly looked at him before. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a man who carried something special inside him, something she had been blind to. Later in the afternoon, the academy was thrown into a brief panic. A sudden storm outside had caused the lights to flicker and then go out completely. The students groaned, unsure of what to do. The hallways were dark except for the soft glow of the emergency lights. The girl felt a surge of unease, not because of the darkness, but because she realized she wouldn't have a chance to rehearse properly before the gala. "Don't worry," one of her friends said, trying to stay cheerful. "We can just wait it out." The girl didn't reply. Instead, she walked toward the practice rooms, her thoughts racing. As she passed by the main hall, she noticed him sitting quietly at the piano. The emergency lights cast long shadows, but he didn't move. He just sat there, his hands resting lightly on the keys. Something inside her shifted. She remembered the last time she had heard him play, the way his music had moved her in ways she couldn't explain. Without thinking, she stepped closer, curiosity and anticipation pulling her forward. "Are you going to play?" she asked softly. Her voice broke the silence, and he looked up at her. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he nodded slightly, as if giving permission for the music to begin. He took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, almost hesitant. It filled the empty hall with a quiet, fragile beauty. Then came another note, stronger this time, followed by a series of chords that seemed to rise and fall like the waves of the sea. The girl felt her chest tighten as she listened. Each note carried emotion, be sorrow, hope, longing, joy. It was music that spoke without words, music that told stories she couldn't even name. She watched him carefully. His eyes were closed, his expression calm but focused. His fingers moved with precision and grace as if they had a memory of their own. She realized that he wasn't just playing the piano. He was speaking through it. He was telling a story only he knew, but one that everyone could feel. She had never experienced anything like this before. She had played piano for years, performed for judges, won competitions, but none of it had ever made her feel the way she felt now. The music wasn't about technique or perfection. It was about life, about real emotions that couldn't be measured or compared. For the first time, she felt small. Her pride, her confidence, her sense of superiority, all of it seemed trivial in comparison to the depth of his playing. She realized that she had laughed at him, mocked him without knowing anything about him. And now, listening to him, she understood how wrong she had been. As he played, she thought about the life he must have lived. There was a sadness in his music, a hint of loss. She wondered what had happened to him, what had caused him to stop performing publicly, why he had chosen to live a quiet life cleaning floors instead of standing on a stage. She realized that he had carried his pain with him, had turned it into something beautiful, something that could touch the hearts of others. The storm outside raged on, but inside the hall, time seemed to stop. She could hear the wind howling and the rain beating against the windows, but it was distant, unimportant. All that mattered was the music, the story being told by the man sitting quietly at the piano. When the final note faded into silence, she felt a strange emptiness. The music was gone, but its impact remained, like a ripple in water that lingered long after the stone had been thrown. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to ask questions, but the words seemed inadequate. He opened his eyes slowly and looked at her. There was no pride in his gaze, no desire for recognition, just a calm understanding, as if he knew the effect his music would have but didn't need to comment on it. "That was incredible," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly. "Thank you," he replied. "It has been a long time since I played like that." She felt a sudden urge to ask him more, to learn everything she could about him. But she hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, didn't want to break the quiet magic of the moment. Instead, she nodded and walked away slowly, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't fully understand. Over the next few days, she found herself paying more attention to him than ever before. She watched how he moved through the hallways, how he treated every object with care, how he never complained, how he never demanded attention. There was a dignity in his quietness, a strength in his humility. She realized that talent wasn't always about showing off, about winning competitions, about applause. Sometimes it was about living with grace, about carrying your story in a way that touched others without even trying. She began to feel a strange mix of guilt and admiration. Guilt for the way she had treated him, laughed at him, mocked him. Admiration for the depth of his character, the beauty of his talent, the calm strength he carried without anyone noticing. One afternoon, she decided to speak to him again. She found him in a small practice room, setting up chairs and moving music stands. She hesitated at the door, unsure of how to start. "May I talk to you for a moment?" she asked softly. He looked up, his expression calm. "Of course," he said. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She felt the weight of the previous days, the guilt, the admiration, the curiosity, all pressing down on her chest. I want to apologize, she said finally. For laughing at you, for mocking you. It was wrong. I didn't understand. He nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. It's okay. People often judge what they don't understand. I'm used to it. She felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to ask him about his past, about the music, about everything she had been curious about. But she also realized that some things were not ready to be shared, that stories carried pain that couldn't be spoken lightly. Instead, she said, I want to hear you play again. If that's all right. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, he said. I think I would like that. That afternoon, he sat at the piano while she listened quietly. He played with the same depth, the same emotion, but this time she felt something else, and a connection. She realized that music could bridge gaps, could make people understand each other without words. She began to understand that his silence, his humility, his quiet life, all of it was part of the story he told through his music. She stayed there for hours, listening, learning, feeling. For the first time, she understood that life wasn't about pride or competition. It wasn't about being the best in the room or winning applause. It was about honesty, about emotion, about carrying your story in a way that could touch others. When the day ended, she walked home slowly, her mind and heart full of thoughts she couldn't yet express. She realized that her life had changed, that her understanding of music, of people, of herself, had shifted in ways she couldn't yet explain. She knew one thing for certain. The janitor, the man she had once mocked, had taught her more about music, about talent, and about life than anyone else ever had. And she also knew that the next time he played, it would not just be music. It would be a lesson, a story, a gift, and she would be ready to receive it fully. The storm had passed, but the ripple it left in her heart remained, and she felt certain that the next chapter of her life, the one that would unfold during the gala, would be shaped by the quiet strength and extraordinary talent of the man everyone else had overlooked. The night of the gala finally arrived, and the Music Academy was buzzing with excitement. The grand hall was packed with people, their faces glowing under the soft lights. The air was warm, scented faintly with flowers and polished wood mixed with the faint tension of anticipation. Students moved hurriedly across the stage, adjusting instruments, checking sheet music, and whispering last-minute reminders to each other. The girl, normally full of confidence and pride, felt an unfamiliar nervousness. The memory of the janitor's music, his quiet strength, and the depth of his talent stayed in her mind like a persistent echo. She watched as the other students took their positions, performing one by one with practiced smiles and perfect technique. Applause followed each performance, polite and warm, but there was something missing. None of it carried the raw, emotional power she had heard from the janitor. She felt a gnawing question inside her. How could someone so unnoticed carry so much beauty, while these performances, though flawless, felt empty? Backstage, she adjusted her dress and took a deep breath. The head of the academy walked past, giving encouraging nods to the performers. The girl knew she had worked hard, practiced endlessly, and had been recognized for her talent many times. But she couldn't shake the thought of the janitor. She remembered the way he had played in the empty hall, how the notes had soared with emotion, how the music had seemed alive, speaking directly to the heart. She wondered where he was tonight. Would he come? Could he even play in front of an audience after all these years? Then quietly, someone approached from the wings. It was him. The janitor had a calm presence, almost understated, but it immediately drew her attention. He wasn't wearing fancy clothes or a suit, just his usual uniform, slightly worn but clean. He carried himself with quiet dignity, and there was a confidence in his eyes that the girl had never seen before. For a moment, she felt her chest tighten. This was the man she had mocked, laughed at, and underestimated. And now he stood here, poised, ready to play, carrying the weight of a story she had only glimpsed. The head of the academy noticed him as well. There was a brief pause, a flicker of surprise in their eyes, but then they nodded and stepped aside. He may play, the head whispered to the assistants. It is his choice. The girl watched, holding her breath. She couldn't predict what would happen next. Would he falter? Would he refuse? Or would he, in that quiet, understated way, astonish everyone? He walked to the grand piano on the stage. The audience, unaware of who he was, murmured softly, curious about this unusual figure. He didn't speak. He simply sat down, adjusted the bench slightly, and rested his hands on the keys. Silence fell over the hall. The girl, standing at the edge of the stage, felt her heart pound. Then he played. The first note was soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. It captured everyone's attention instantly. The sound wasn't just music. It was a story unfolding in real time. Each note carried meaning, emotion, and life. His fingers moved with perfect grace. Yet there was an imperfection too, a human touch that made the music feel alive. The girl felt tears sting her eyes, and she wasn't the only one. She looked around and saw other students, teachers, and even audience members leaning forward, captivated. As he continued, the music grew richer, more powerful. It swelled and softened, rose and fell like the tide. The audience sat in stunned silence, unable to look away, unable to breathe fully. The melody spoke of sorrow, of loss, of hope, of beauty that could not be contained in words. It was as if every emotion the janitor had ever felt, every hardship, every joy, every silent struggle had poured into these notes. The girl's pride, her usual sense of superiority, melted away. She realized how small her previous concerns had been, how shallow the competitions, awards, and applause she had chased were compared to this. She had been chasing recognition, but recognition alone could never create the impact that real talent, real expression could. She felt a wave of humility wash over her. She remembered the first time she had laughed at him, the cruel words she had spoken without thought. She wanted to disappear, to apologize immediately, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the piano. Each note was a lesson, each chord a reminder of what true music could be. Around her, the audience was beginning to react. Some whispered to each other, unable to believe the skill and emotion they were witnessing. Others sat frozen, tears in their eyes, completely absorbed. The janitor played not for applause, not for recognition, but because this was who he was. This was the story he carried, and now, for the first time, he shared it with the world. The girl felt a sudden surge of admiration and guilt. She realized she had spent years thinking of talent as something to show off, as something to measure and compete over. But this was something entirely different. Talent could be quiet, unnoticed, and still be more powerful than anything performed on a stage for praise. As the final notes faded into silence, the hall remained still. No one moved, no one clapped at first. The sound had left an imprint, a resonance that could not be immediately acknowledged. The girl's hands trembled at her sides. Her breath came in short bursts. The janitor lifted his hands from the keys, eyes calm, almost serene, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Then the audience erupted. Applause filled the hall, loud and overwhelming, echoing off the walls and ceiling. People stood cheering, clapping, some wiping away tears. The girl felt her own hands join in, but it was different this time. She wasn't clapping out of duty or expectation. She was clapping because she understood. She was clapping because she had witnessed something rare, something that transcended her understanding of music, talent, and human connection. The janitor stood quietly, acknowledging the applause with a subtle nod, not a smile, not a bow. It wasn't about recognition for him. It was about sharing the music, and he had done that fully, without concern for himself. After the applause died down, the girl approached him. Her heart pounded in her chest and her voice trembled. That was incredible, she said. I've never heard anything like it. He nodded gently, eyes meeting hers. Thank you, he said softly. I played because it needed to be played. She felt a lump in her throat. The words were simple, but they carried more meaning than anything she could say. She realized that humility, strength, and talent could coexist in ways she had never understood before. The audience was still buzzing with excitement, talking among themselves about the man who had appeared from nowhere to play, as if the music had always been a part of him. Students who had once mocked or ignored him looked at him differently now, with respect, awe, and curiosity. Even the teachers who had known a part of his story were visibly moved. Later, as the gala continued, the girl found herself reflecting on what she had learned. The janitor had taught her lessons she could never have learned in a classroom. He had shown her that talent wasn't about recognition or appearance, but about heart, authenticity, and courage. He had reminded her that life carried stories behind every person, Stories that might be hidden under uniforms, behind quiet faces, or beneath ordinary routines. When the gala ended, the girl walked home slowly, thinking about the night. She replayed the music in her mind, imagining each note, each emotion, each story the janitor had shared without words. She knew she would never forget it, that it would shape the way she approached music, people, and life from that day forward. For the first time, she felt a desire not to be the best, not to compete or boast, but simply to understand, to listen, and to grow. She realized that her life had been limited by her pride, by her assumptions, by the shallow ways she had measured herself against others. And she knew now that true greatness was quiet, humble, and often unnoticed, just like the man who had played the piano with a depth that touched everyone in the room. She also realized something else, that people were capable of surprising you, capable of rising from silence to astonishment in ways you could never predict. And that night, she learned the value of respect, humility, and the quiet power of extraordinary talent. The janitor had changed everything, not just for the audience, not just for her, but for everyone who had been fortunate enough to witness his performance. And she knew that the next steps of her journey, and perhaps of the academy itself, would never be the same again. The days after the gala were quiet at the music academy, but there was a different energy in the air. People walked a little slower, looked around a little more carefully, and noticed things they had ignored before. The janitor moved through the halls as he always did, quietly performing his duties, but now there were whispers of respect wherever he went. Students who had once laughed at him now greeted him politely, some even with genuine admiration in their voices. Teachers nodded to him with a smile that carried acknowledgement of his talent, his past, and his humility. The girl walked through the hallways with a mixture of pride and reflection. She had seen many performances in her life, many people who were skilled and talented, but none had ever touched her like he had. She remembered every note, every subtle shift in the melody, every rise and fall of the music that seemed to come straight from his heart. She realized that the world often overlooked quiet greatness, the kind of talent that didn't need to announce itself to be extraordinary. And she had been blind to it, thinking only of appearances, status, and recognition. She paused near the piano in the main hall, the same one he had played during the gala. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she allowed herself to remember the night, the music, and the feelings it had stirred in her. She thought about what she had learned from him, about humility, about the real meaning of talent, and about seeing people beyond what they seemed to be. It was then that she noticed a small envelope lying on the piano bench. Curious, she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a note in neat handwriting. "Thank you for listening," it read. "Music is not about applause. It is about connection, about sharing what cannot be said in words. Keep listening, and you will hear the world differently." She felt a lump in her throat. She realized that this man who had been her janitor, her object of mockery, her silent teacher, had given her a gift more valuable than any prize or award she had ever won. He had shown her that greatness wasn't loud or demanding. It could be quiet, immediately and profoundly moving. Over the next few weeks, she found herself changing in small ways. She listened more carefully to others, noticing their emotions, their struggles, and their strengths. She spoke less to boast and more to understand. She practiced the piano not just to perform perfectly, but to express what she felt, to let the music speak for her in ways she hadn't before. The lessons she had learned from him had seeped into every part of her life. One afternoon, she saw him near the entrance, preparing to leave after his shift. She hesitated for a moment, then walked up to him. I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "For the music, for the lessons, for showing me everything. I don't know how to explain it, but it changed me." He looked at her, calm and gentle, and nodded. "You've already understood," he said. "That is enough." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she realized that gratitude could be simple, direct, and powerful, just like the music he had played. Word of his performance had spread beyond the academy. People who had attended the gala spoke about it to friends and family. Local musicians and even some critics began to ask about him, curious to learn more about the man who had played with such depth and emotion. But he did not seek the spotlight. He continued his work quietly, moving through the halls, mopping the floors, arranging chairs, always humble, always unassuming. The girl found herself thinking more and more about how many people in the world went unnoticed, how many stories went unheard, and how much greatness remained hidden. She realized that true talent, true courage, and true heart were often invisible until someone took the time to look, to listen, and to understand. One evening, the academy held a small gathering for the students and teachers. The girl sat in the front row, her heart filled with anticipation and respect. To her surprise, the janitor was invited to play again. There were murmurs of excitement and curiosity throughout the room. People who had once overlooked him now watched in awe as he approached the piano, calm, composed, and ready to share his gift once more. He began to play, and the room fell silent. This time everyone could feel the music more deeply. The sound filled the space, weaving stories of life, loss, hope, and renewal. Tears formed in many eyes. Some students held their hands to their hearts. Even those who had never been moved by music before found themselves caught up in the emotion, unable to look away. The girl sat quietly, absorbing every note, every pause, every subtle movement of his fingers. She realized that music had the power to unite people, to make them feel and understand beyond words. She thought about her own journey, how she had laughed, mocked, and ignored him, and how she had been transformed by his music. When the final note faded, the room erupted into applause, louder and more heartfelt than before. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, some with tears still glistening in their eyes. The janitor stood, acknowledging the appreciation with a quiet nod, not a bow, not a smile. It wasn't about recognition. It was about sharing, about giving something of himself to the world without expecting anything in return. Afterwards, the girl approached him again. Her voice trembled slightly. I think I understand now, she said. Music, life, people. It's not about who is on stage or who wins awards. It's about heart, about honesty, about sharing what is real. He nodded, eyes soft with understanding. Yes, he said. And now you can carry that understanding with you in everything you do. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. She realized that her life had changed because of him. She had learned to see people, to listen to them, to understand the value of hidden talent and quiet courage. She had learned that greatness could be simple, humble, and unassuming, yet leave a profound impact. In the weeks and months that followed, the girl continued her studies with a new perspective. She practiced not just to perfect her technique, but to express herself, to connect, and to feel. She listened more carefully to her fellow students, noticing their struggles and strengths. She learned that everyone had a story, and sometimes the most extraordinary stories were hidden in the most ordinary people. The janitor continued his work at the academy, quietly carrying out his duties, always humble, always unassuming. But now he was seen differently. Students and teachers alike respected him, admired him, and treated him with warmth. They had witnessed something rare and extraordinary, and they had learned from it. The girl often thought about that first day when she had mocked him, when she had laughed and made cruel jokes. She realized how far she had come since then. She had grown not just as a musician, but as a person. She had learned the value of humility, the power of listening, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. One afternoon, she sat at the piano herself, thinking about him and the lessons he had taught her. She played slowly, deliberately, feeling each note, letting the music flow from her heart rather than her mind. She realized that this was what music was truly about: connection, honesty, and the courage to express what could not be said in words. Later, she walked past the janitor who was quietly arranging chairs in the hall. She smiled at him, a warm, genuine smile. He returned it with a subtle nod, and she felt a deep sense of respect and gratitude. She understood now that life was full of hidden lessons, that greatness often went unnoticed, and that every person carried a story worth listening to. The academy itself had changed as well. Students who had once been focused solely on awards and recognition began to see music differently. They listened more, practiced with intention, and valued the emotional power of their performances as much as the technical perfection. Teachers encouraged authenticity and expression alongside skill. The atmosphere became one of growth, respect, and understanding, inspired in no small part by the quiet presence of the janitor and the depth of his music. The girl knew that the night of the gala, and the lessons she had learned from him, would stay with her forever. She had discovered that true greatness was not about showing off, not about winning applause, and not about being noticed. It was about heart, humility, and the courage to share what is real. She had learned to see people, to listen to them, and to respect the stories they carried. And she knew that she would carry these lessons with her for the rest of her life. As the sun set over the academy one evening, the girl watched him quietly close the doors after his shift. She thought about the music, the lessons, and the quiet strength he had shared with her and with the world. She realized that true greatness often walks in plain sight, unnoticed, until someone takes the time to see, to listen, and to understand. And she knew that she had been fortunate to witness it, to learn from it, and to let it change her in ways she had never imagined possible. The janitor, with his quiet presence and extraordinary talent, had left an imprint, not just on the music academy but on her heart, teaching her the most important lesson of all, that the power of music, humility, and understanding could transform lives in ways no applause ever could. From that day forward, the girl carried the memory of his music, the lessons of his life, and the quiet strength he had shared. And every time she played the piano herself, she remembered that it was not about being the best or being noticed, but about expressing the truth of the heart, connecting with others, and leaving a legacy of beauty, humility, and grace.